Are you a collector or a hoarder? All this and more on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology. The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Audio snout, it's the PiGUS.
Virtually amazing monsters.
And Hoard of the things.
All this and more coming up on this week's show. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. Hello, chaps. I hope you've had a good week. We're going to start off this week with a correction to last week's show, a point of clarification that was posted. Chris
Bonus information. Let's call it bonus information.
Bonus information, courtesy of Moivor over on the subreddit. He says, "Hi Neil. In the latest episode, you brought up the Evercade and you stated that you were disappointed that the Evercade does not play arcade games, only console games. This was true initially of the Evercade, as there were still licensing discussions going on. But from late last year, they've started to release a range of arcade cartridges. So I think these are identified by a different color. I think there might be the purple carts or something like that. Yeah. And they include the Technos Arcade Collection 1, Data East, Gaelco, Atari, Jalico, Gaelco Arcade 2, IRIM, and Toplan arcade collections. And Moivor goes on to say, unfortunately, Double Dragon 1 is not on the Technos Arcade cart. It's still the NES version on that other cart, due to the amount of slowdown the game has on the real cab and thus in emulation. Evercade has had a discussion about this specifically on one of the podcasts they did. So there you go. Arcade games are emulated on the Evercade. We stand corrected, but Double Dragon 1 still remains the NES version. Chris is desperate to say something here.
I am, because that was 100% my fault. So I researched that story, and Neil had offline said something in our chat about the fact that it might play arcade games. I said, no, I'm pretty sure it didn't. I did research, and from everything I found, it said that it played console games, and yeah, it was as of, I think, November last year that they added the arcade.
Right, so still pretty recent.
Yeah.
And Double Dragon 1's still an interesting one. So they say it's not included because of the slowdown. And that's where you come to the big question with these things is, how did you break the authenticity? Because there are switches in emulation where you can stop that slowdown in Double Dragon and it becomes a slightly different and, even more playable game. It's a great experience. But it's not an authentic experience because you're not getting the original slowdown. So do you or don't you? Personally, I think it's always nice to have the option to do it. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I agree.
I know that some games have sprite flicker where they've gone a little bit beyond what the machine could probably do. So removing the sprite flicker, if you won't remove the slowdown, would you remove the sprite flicker? I think I would remove the sprite flicker.
This does make the Evercade even more tempting, though, I must say. Now that I know this.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Nice little unit.
So, Chris, what have you been up to this week?
Well, there's lots I could tell, but the main thing I do want to talk about is I watched a recording of a live stream by a group of YouTubers that call themselves the Retro 5. And so they're all, what I like about this is they're all sub 2,000 subscription channels. In fact, most of them are hovering around the 1,000 sub mark. So this is Retro Bait, Retro Chef, Ginger Hippie Gaming, 42, Nerdy Geezer, and Sega Zombie. Really relaxed guys. And they get together, I think it's once a month, to do this live stream. I obviously watch the recording because of the time difference, because they're all UK based. But keeping in mind these are relatively small channels, they had Dominic Diamond on from Games Master. So I just want to say, A, well done to those guys, but B, just Dominic, you're a star. Just, mixing it in with the lads, and it is one of the most relaxed chats you'll ever watch. Just, there's some colourful language, and they're just laying it all out there. It's not all about games, it's all about all sorts of things, and a really great chat. So, yeah, it was cool.
Well, it's funny you should mention him. I have an interview with him on Friday of this week, which I'm very much looking forward to. So I'll go and check out that channel. What's the channel name again?
It was actually on the live stream was hosted by Retro Chef. So yeah, look up
Retro
that.
Chef. Okay, so I'll go and check out that channel because that will be good research before I do my retro tea break with him. Dominic actually reached out to me. I did ask him a few years ago for an interview, and he kindly replied and said he was sort of all interviewed out. I think he'd been on the media campaign, and that was it. He was closing the door on that, and then he emailed me a few weeks back and just said, does the offer still stand? Could we do an interview? And I think it's to do with, obviously he has something to promote. That's why people like to do interviews most of the time. And I think it's to do with his newspaper column. He's back as a games journalist in a UK newspaper. So he wants to shout about that a little bit as well, which is great.
Fantastic.
We'll get a view on that side of things as well. Yeah.
Hmm.
How about you, Dave? What have you been up to?
I've been in computer hell with my XP build that I've been talking about the past couple of times. It's going so well. I was delighted with it. It's all sorted. And then I connected up to a CRT and no video. So problems with VGA and DVI, but I did get it solved late last night. So I now have it all sorted out. I have a very complicated set of 5 PCs sharing a single 21-inch CRT, keyboard, mouse, speakers, MT32 Pi, and I've been going through them all to get them all just right. It turns out I like building computers almost probably more than playing the games on them. So I've been doing lots of that. But there was something else I've been thinking about since last week. Last week there was 2 sort of cat-based Easter eggs in the video, and I wanted to make sure video viewers noticed and to let people know that we do these little things. So first of all, on the screen behind Chris, he had his cat, the Stitch, was it? Stitch?
Yeah, Stitch. Yeah, the thin
Stitch.
one.
Yeah. On his screen, where he's now got a joystick and a picture of, I think, his current setup.
The finished game for Rich. That's what that is. But anyway.
Is it? Oh, the finished game.
Yes,
Well done. Well done. He will be delighted.
It's not very good. Yeah.
He'll be delighted. Just that you made it for him, he'll be delighted.
Yeah.
But also, producer Duncan added a little clip that came from the warm-up to the end as a post-credit scene with Johnny getting some treats. So will there be more visual Easter eggs? Keep your eyes peeled.
Let's go into our first story, shall we? Our first story this week was shared by none other than the legend that is DJ Hoffman. Thank you, Hoffman, for contributing. It's all about the Gravis Ultrasound, or the GUS, the GUS. It was a sound card for PC owners released in 1992. And if you thought you were special by owning an actual genuine Creative Sound Blaster card and not a cheap clone, then your ultrasound-owning friends looked down on you. Well, only a little bit. They weren't that much more expensive than Creative's cards, but they were a bit special. And they were made in, it was a red PCB that they made these cards in, which really made them stand out. But more importantly, they were a lot cheaper than the professional cards that were aimed at musicians. And that's what this thing was really catered for. It was a 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz stereo sound card, and it had RAM on board into which you could store instrument patches on something that they marketed as the wavetable. So if you were a musician using a MIDI-capable instrument, you could load up a bunch of realistic-sounding instruments into the card and use them for playback. And those who owned them sung their praises, which also had native support, these devices, for the Sound Blaster. So it was Sound Blaster compatible technically, but it did this through a memory resident layer. It was emulation software that would take up a bit of memory, and remember how crucial memory was back in those days. Every byte counted. And it was a bit clunky. So that certainly wasn't its best feature. But if your game supported the ultrasound natively, you were getting some of the best audio out there on the PC on a consumer budget that you could get. Now, this reputation has given the card a little bit of a cult following with the original owners. And for those of us who only ever saw it as an install option appear on the screen when we were choosing our sound card, or as an advert in our magazine, it's only really raised its desirability because it's one of those things, like the Roland MT32, that many of us lusted after, couldn't afford, and never got to experience. Well, now we do have a chance to experience it, thanks to this new piece of hardware, which is called the PiGUS. That's capital P, lowercase I, and then capital GUS. So, so that was Dave, not me, not Chris, and not a real pig. It was quite a convincing impression. Now, as you can guess from the name, the Pi in PiGUS is, of course, a Raspberry Pi. This project is the work of Ian Scott, aka Polpo, over on the Vogons forum, where he's documented the project. And there'll be a link in the show notes if you want to read up on it. So what he's created is a PCB that slots into the ISA slot, an 8-bit ISA slot on your old PC. And then from there comes a ribbon cable that goes all the way back to your Pi. It has to be a Pi 3 or greater to have enough power to do this. And that ribbon cable plugs onto the GPIO pins of the Pi, and the Pi then emulates the ultrasound. The software it's running is the same Circle, it's called Circle bare metal environment that's used for the Pi MT32 project. So as we know, if it's anything like that project, it will boot up very quickly, probably quicker than your machine manages to post. So it's all detected properly, and you can initialize it in DOS and use it in your game seamlessly. Dave, you were pointing at something there. What was that?
That was the MT32 Pi.
Oh, okay. You've got one there next to you. Yeah. So this project is not complete, but it is complete enough that Ian's thrown up some demos on Twitter that you can see running. Again, hopefully links in the show notes if you'd like to see them. So let's just talk about the ultrasound in general. Starting with you, Dave. Did you have one, or did you know anyone that had a Gravis Ultrasound?
No, I don't think I've ever seen one in person. I do remember the lovely red card, and people who weren't in the kind of into PCs in the 90s may not realise that everything was green. Everything was a green PCB, so a red card was unique. So I don't think I saw any PCBs in red until I saw the GUS. And I think the red PCB is a Canadian thing because ATI also did it, and they're a Canadian company. So I wonder if that's why it was. But back then I was scraping around to get an AdLib compatible, and then a Sound Blaster compatible while the GUS was around. And I think by the time that I had a properly good, actual, real, creative sound card, the wind was out of the sails of the GUS, and a Sound Blaster was the one to get. Since then, though, I have learned how good it really was. And I keep seeing people mentioning it in terms of the Amiga, in terms of demos, and I think it was the demo scene card of choice. So I have this feeling that maybe Amiga people who moved to the PC got into the GUS because of how good it was for samples and synth, etc. I've asked producer Duncan to add a link to the second Reality PC demo on the GUS as well. It's from 1993, I think. So, as you know, though, I do love my DOS PCs, and I have several, and I have a spare Pi 3 now that I've got the official MT32 Pi, which uses the 02W, so I've got the Pi 3 left over, so maybe that's what I need for my DOS machine. And as for being the ultimate DOS sound card, which is what it was submitted as, I don't think it is. It's absolutely not the ultimate DOS sound card.
What I'd love to see you've got your Pi MT32, I'd love to see an option to maybe just press a button and switch it from MT32 to ultrasound, so you can switch between these projects.
Oh, that would be cool.
And then use one device. I mean, there will be situations where you want to use both at the same time, I'm sure, but it would be nice, wouldn't it? I'm
not sure you can, because the Pi MT32 works through MIDI, and the GUS didn't. The GUS was an actual sound card.
I get that. I get that. What I mean is to press a button to just switch the whole Pi into the different sound card emulator.
Oh, okay.
So you can use one device for multiple hardware emulations. Yeah.
That'd be cool.
That would be cool. So the ultimate DOS sound card, I don't think so. I'll keep my Orpheus until something better comes along. I think the Sound Blaster is more compatible, and I think the GUS support, it was there for a while, and then it just faded away. Even though it was a Betamax of sound cards, slightly better than the Sound Blaster, but it didn't quite catch on. Now, Chris, what about you? Did you have one, or know anyone that had one?
No, I didn't, and it's like discussions about the Roland stuff. It's not until recently that I've realised what I was missing out on. And again, I've mentioned it before, I felt ripped off when I jumped from the Amiga to PC, initially just with the internal speaker. Of course, you would feel ripped off with that. But even when I got my Sound Blaster Pro, it didn't sound quite right to me, coming from Paula. And I think one of the videos that opened my eyes to what the GUS was capable of was by LGR. And it was about a similar project to this one. So that was the RGUS, and that's a clone of the original using an AMD Interwave chip. When you watch that video, and he's also done a video on the original GUS as well, you do hear those kind of Amiga-ish tones, as I would put it. It does sound a lot more familiar to an Amiga user than any of the other PC sound cards. So the one that LGR mentions, the RGUS, that's $100 Canadian though, and that's just the PCB with the AMD Interwave chip mounted on it. You have to fully populate the card yourself. So, yeah, bit of a price difference.
when you say that it's got those Amiga-ish tones, do you think that's something to do with the hardware, or do you just think it's because Amiga people liked to use that in the demo scene, and so they carried their sound across with them?
I think probably the latter, actually, to be honest. But yeah, definitely. I don't know, even some of the music that LGL was playing, I can't even remember off the top of my head what games he trialed, but it just had that sort of familiar deepness to the tones, whereas the Sound Blaster, excuse my French, but it sounds a bit farty in some ways, especially things like percussion instruments, the hi-hats and stuff sound quite wet, for want of a better term, compared to what I was used to from the Amiga. So yeah, just a richer sound. Yeah.
I think little before we get a correction, I think the Argus card isn't based on the original Gravis Ultrasound. I think it's in one of the later cards from Gravis rather than the original.
Yeah,
I think I'm not entirely certain about this, but I've got a feeling it's not quite the original one.
Right. So,
and we also need to differentiate as well between, whether the music was being done on the OPL on the Sound Blaster, or whether it was using digital samples, and the way the GUS was working. Yeah, there's a lot to pick apart that we could be corrected on with this story. I'm being extra cautious after our correction this week on the Event Drive. So.
But we've still got the bruises.
We've still got the bruises, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and it's all on me. But I do think it's funny that it's nearly 30 years later that I'm finally finding out what PC games should have sounded like, and what the other options were on the, when you installed a game like you've already mentioned and you had those other options, what they would have actually done had I had those options available to me. But I want to raise a question here. Are the boxes to blame? Because I've got 3 boxes here, and I'll only dig out one, but I'll dig out X-Wing first of all.
The glasses are on.
The glasses are on because I can't. When did these fonts get smaller? These boxes have shrunk in the wash. I
Put
swear.
your glasses on, dear.
But all it says under SoundCloud. So this one actually does say. So this is X-Wing, original X-Wing. It does say Sound Blaster, Adlib, Roland, and Pro Audio. And that's all. Spectrum incompatible and general MIDI supported. Both the other 2 examples I've got here, though. So that's F-22 Dominance Fighter only mentions Sound Blaster, as does my Duke Nukem Kiloton collection. Look at that. Bit of a munted box. Needs some restoration, but anyway. And all that mentions is Sound Blaster or 100% compatible. And from my memory, that became the norm. You looked on a box and all it would say would be Sound Blaster or 100% compatible. So is that part of the problem, why we didn't choose other cards?
I guess it depends on the era. Before that, it would have said Adlib. I mean, they would have sometimes said support Disney Sound Source. Did you ever use one of those? Games like Stunt Island supported that. I'm sure there was a degree in some instances where Creative would have been paying people to slap stickers on their boxes and say, Sound Blaster recommended and things like that. But it did legit become the standard, so the majority of boxes would have just said we support that because it's the standard. I personally didn't know anyone with an ultrasound back in the day. It was, like you said, just an option in the install menus, and I didn't get to hear one probably until YouTube came along and people started sharing these things, and I was able to look one up and have a listen. And this project at the moment, it's very much a work in progress. So, as I say, it's got the ribbon cable, it's got pins exposed so that Ian can tap into it with his scope and see what's going on and diagnose problems. What I'd love to see this evolve into, hopefully, would be a full-blown ISA card that you just slot your Pi into, so it's one hard card rather than ribbon cables, and you just stick it in a PC. I'd love to see that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it would be nice to have the option to switch that to different sound cards as more and more people perhaps copy this and emulate other sound cards, even if it's just a basic but authentic sound. How can it be authentic? It's emulated. You know what I'm saying? As authentic as possible to the machine. Sound Blaster emulated by a Pi. That would be a great option as well. Dave?
I've just had a thought. It was Hoffman that submitted this, and Hoffman's right into his demo music and so on. So is that why he's interested in the GUS?
Oh, highly likely. Yeah, that's probably why he's raised it. Yeah. So, we'll have to get him on the show one day.
Would he come on? I know he likes.
We can only ask.
Saturday morning serial, and he said, "Was it? Who was he called? Someone and Gordon the Gopher.
Gordon the
Two
Gopher.
People. Trevor, Simon, and Jordan the Gopher.
So who is Gordon the
Who's
Gopher?
Gordon?
Oh, is that
Who's
who we
Gordon the
are?
Gopher?
I
Yeah.
don't think we want to know the answer to that.
Oh, swing your pants. Isn't that what they used to sing? Swing your pants, Trevor and Simon. Do you not remember that song? I'll just move on.
You made it up, Neil. It didn't happen.
They only sang it to me. So I'm following this project with a lot of excitement. Thank you to Hoffman for submitting the story. Links are all in the show notes, or you can come and see the story as posted at reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro, where you can also submit your own stories if you'd like us to discuss them, upvote the ones that you're interested in, and downvote the ones that you're not.
Back in the distant past, there was a ZX81 game so scary, so terrifying, so horrific in its tension that some gamers profess to be mentally scarred to this day. Forever running, forever taking corner after corner, forever lost, forever fearful that something that looked like an early monochrome rendition of Barney the dinosaur was going to get them. Yep. Will the nightmare never end? Well, the nightmare was, of course, 3D Monster Maze, and it would seem that the nightmare has only just begun because, thanks to an indie developer called Steve Smith, 3D Monster Maze now plunges you into VR. Yep, you can play it on your PC VR setup from your browser, and Steve developed it using the Quest 2. Now, you're probably expecting some modern recreation with up-to-date textures and graphics, but that's not what this is. And personally, this is what I love about Steve's work. Aside from the use of a torch and some slight lighting effects, he's kept everything as simplistic as the original, and it kind of looks like the original as well. It just happens to be in VR. So what do you guys think? Do you dare go into the maze?
Oh, I dare go into the maze every week, Chris, because I have a ZX81 and I have this game specifically set up for people to come and play. But the first challenge to playing it when they come to the cave is loading it. It's the one machine that's not loaded using SD cards or anything like that. They have to follow the instructions to use the horrible keyboard to type load, speech mark, rewind the tape, wait for it to load, hope it loads, because, 2 out of 3 times it doesn't actually load. And then try and play it without wobbling the RAM pack. The number of times I've walked over there as well, and people have pressed something. I don't know what they'd press, but they pressed something that makes the basic code, because I think this is coded in BASIC. Certainly looks like it. Just appears all down the screen. So they somehow break out of the game and all the code is over the screen. And then they've got to rewind it and they've got to wait the 4 minutes for it to load again. So it's all part of the experience. But when it's working, it is amazing how it does capture that feeling of suspense. It does truly deserve the title that it has of being the first 3D suspense horror game, because there is a lot of suspense in there. Just knowing that Rex is out there laying in wait for you, and every move, every corner, he might be around the next corner. It's a great game to play in a darkened room late at night. And I couldn't actually run the game in the browser. I tried to run this, and it said your browser doesn't support VR. And it's no surprise, I don't have my VR headset here, so there's probably a plugin or something that's needed, or a different browser with support for it. So I looked it up and had a watch on YouTube. And as he said, it's a very simple looking game. He's captured the essence of the original game, and for all its simplicity, it does still maintain that feeling of suspense. Just watching it on YouTube, I wasn't playing it, but I was still worried about Rex coming around the corner watching it. It is a game that is in true 3D, of course. You've got your VR headset on, you can look around. The walls are all just a basic checkerboard pattern. That's it, just one texture for every wall. The lights are dim within the game, and then you wave your torch around and it lights up those bits of the wall. And that's it, you're just wandering around a maze that all looks the same. But it all looks the same, and Rex is there somewhere, and you're waving your torch about, and that's it. That's all there is to it, and it works. At least it works as a viewer. Dave, do you feel the same as me?
Yeah, I think so. I think I think if he hadn't kept with that, it would have been nothing. If you know what I mean. If he hadn't kept with the basic idea of the basic graphics and so on, it would have been just another basic VR game. Now I saw the box for this when I visited the cave. the one you mentioned you've got in the exhibition, and it's one of the most memorable things that I saw when I visited. There's this era of game boxes before they were done on computers, and this is a hand-drawn, simple line one, and it's nothing like the other take games you might see. It really is something to see. I don't know if it's on one of the shelves behind you, Neil. Can you reach and get it on the shop shelf?
I can't quite reach, Dave.
Well, maybe Duncan can add a couple of snaps of it. But yeah, the box art for it is something. It's from a different era.
Yeah, it's very brown with brown line art on it, as I remember. And I'll try and get some shots for the show. And there are other games which are done in the same style. So there were a series of games, and they all look lovely together and very brown.
Nice. Yeah. Well, Steve's done some other games actually, which are quite interesting. So the first one I played of his work was a first person, so not VR, but a first person rendition of Saboteur that you can play on your PC. And Saboteur is one of my favourite Spectrum games, so that was really nice.
Oh, we used to have that at school.
Yeah.
It was on the BBC Micro as well, wasn't it? It must have been.
Oh, was it? I don't remember that.
Or maybe we played it on the
the
Archimedes with the Spectrum emulator, but we certainly played it at school. And I always remember how cool that game was, because you came flying in on a rapid rib boat, don't you?
That's right.
And then you're like a ninja that climbs out into is it an oil rig or something like that?
Yeah, some evil lair.
Like
yeah.
It was cool. It was just a cool game.
It was. You felt like a ninja as much as you could in 8-bit. Yeah, it was fantastic. And in fact, you can download. They re-released it for PS4, and again, it's just the original graphics. Or you can switch between Spectrum and C64 on the PS4 version, which is quite nice. But they've updated the sound. But anyway, we're getting off track. So the Spectrum version, what Steve's done is he's just done for the PC, taken the Spectrum graphics, and he was actually given the original map data by Clive Townsend for the project. So it's exactly the same style of textures, exactly the same map. Items, most of the items and enemies are placed in roughly exactly the right spots throughout the game, but you're doing it from first person rather than a 2D sideways view, which is quite trippy to actually sort of be leaping into a game that you played back in the day, which is really nice. And I just love the sort of purist approach that he's got in terms of keeping the look and feel of the original, but throwing a modern twist in the form of 3D with his latest projects, full VR. And they're kind of casual projects. So, yeah, he is open to sort of, not criticism, but, just sort of comments. But he might not make any changes to any of his projects. He said, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's done, and move on to the next one. It's just a nice, relaxed sort of approach. He's just having fun, basically. And he's done lots of projects, actually. He's done the Sentinel VR. He's done Exelon in 3D and now also in VR. He's done Laser Squad in 3D, so first person. Laser Squad 3D, The Assassins, that one's called. Death Chase VR. And he's also done multiplayer versions of games that were originally single player. So he's done a multiplayer version of Manic Miner and Jetpack, for example. And there's heaps more. So, yeah, it's a really interesting little project. I don't know. What other 8-bit era games would you like to see somebody like Steve sort of give this kind of treatment to? What do you guys think?
I've only heard about this now. I've got a barely used VR headset. I hardly ever touch it. But I love the Sentinel on my CPC. It's a fantastic game. Jeff Crammon game, who did Stunt Car Race. He did loads of racing games and the Sentinel. And not many people talk about the Sentinel. It's a cracking game. Sort of a puzzle game, but it's in 3D, so that would be great. Exelon was kind of cool in the CPC, and Laser Squad are one of my favourite games ever. And please, Julian Gollop, come on for a tea break with Neil. I'm definitely, honestly, promise I'm going to look into these. They'll go on a long list of things I need to do. I'm not as much interested in the 3D Monster Maze. Probably won't play that as I am with Sentinel, Laser Squad, and Exelon. As for what I'd like as an 8-bit VR game, hang on a minute. What you're doing here is what we did in the 90s. Every franchise must turn 3Ds. Don't do it. But if it was to pick one, Driller, Darkside, Castle Master, those would be great in VR.
Yeah, and they're kind of built for it, really. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Those are the obvious choices, I guess, because they are 3D, and when you played them back in the day, you always filled in the gaps with your imagination. To go full VR, wow, it would be amazing. I'm going to cheat slightly with my choice. I'm going to go with the TV show Nightmare, because there was an 8-bit version of Nightmare. Now, I'd love to see this in VR, but somebody did actually try to do it back in, I think it was 2004, 2010, sometime around that period. Someone tried to make a VR version of Nightmare, and they released kind of a pilot for it. So it was funded by a national lottery grant, and I think it was designed to be a TV show. I'm just doing a little bit of searching here to find out some more information about it. So I think they were trying to bring the TV show into the 21st century and make it all texture mapped sort of VR, rather than using the green screen and having to edit everything much further down the line and make it all sort of render it afterwards to make it work. And then not have live actors, so there would be rendered people in there. So it looks like that didn't go anywhere, but I'd love to see that become an actual game, which is a bit of an odd one because in Nightmare, the person who was actually wearing the helmet couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
So I haven't got as far as figuring out how that would work. You put your VR headset on and it just acts as a blindfold. Is that
the reason why they wore the helmet is so they couldn't see they were in a TV studio.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if you put your VR thing on, then instead of being blind and 3 people having to tell you what you see, the VR headset does it all for you. So you then become all 4 of them.
I don't know. Maybe there's like a
Kill
multiplayer. Maybe there's a balance where the people with VR headsets can be like the kids on the side looking into the room. And if you're not lucky enough to have a VR headset, you're just on a screen clicking on things, following the instructions or something. I don't know.
Spellcasting VR.
What was that TV? You know where my mind's going now. I'm thinking the reverse, where the person in VR can see more than the people that aren't in VR. But that was done. That was a game show with Craig Charles hosting.
Oh, yeah.
The name of it is gone. I can't remember the name of it.
And he used to shout. Did he shout a wooger in that one?
Yes, he shouts Awooga all the time.
Cyberzone.
That's it. Yes.
Cyberzone. Yeah.
Yes.
That was awful.
That's available to view on YouTube in all its glory. Oh, anyway, look, my choice for this, I think, if you're going to VR or even just FPS an 8-bit game, a Tick Attack, I think that would be great. I'd love that, running around, and that'd be fantastic. Picking up all the things and bouncing my axe off walls.
I'd just like to say I've taken back my entire idea of VR Nightmare. I think it's an awful idea, and I shouldn't have opened my mouth.
So you're back on with Driller and Castlemaster then?
Driller and Castlemaster. And Total Eclipse. Don't forget Total Eclipse.
Yeah, and Dark Side.
I've got that Total Eclipse. I haven't opened it yet. Sealed Amstrad disc version. Ready to get opened.
Oh, what about an engine that lets you, because obviously you had the Freescape, you had in the form of Virtual Studio for PC and 3D Construction Kit for the Amiga. If you could build an engine that would let you export your games that you built in that into VR, yes, I want that. That's a thing that should exist.
So, anyway, Rich, your game is going to be delayed.
It's just Minecraft.
Oh, yeah, true, yeah. Anyway, we could go on that forever. So thanks to Alex McChessers, for sharing Steve's latest work in the subreddit. But also, I just want to say, Steve, you know how much I loved your 3D rendition or your first-person rendition of Saboteur. And I have been watching your VR projects with interest. I just don't yet have the kit to play them. But I really do love your approach, so keep it up.
When does preservation become hoarding? Submitted by Control-Alt-Reese to the subreddit. And it's a story about himself. So Control-Alt-Reese is...
Reese wouldn't submit a link to one of his own videos, would he?
He claims it's not for self-promotion, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Reese visited the Retro Computing Museum in Leicester, so RCM, not RMC, RCM. It's an interesting video to watch. There's, fun enough, amazing VR machines there. He... from decades ago with dinosaurs and so on, and he says the VR machines and he shows the VR machines, they look great. They look like proper, a good experience. He says the best VR experience he's had. He talks to Andy, the guy who started it, and also to Dean. There's a staggering software archive there. I think Andy said 40,000 titles. It's incredible. And he also talks to Dean, who takes him to the warehouse storage area, and that's what sparked all this off. The warehouse area is packed full of micros. There's loads in there. There's some lovely rare machines, but there's also some of the more common ones. And everything is pretty neatly stored. So I've heard it called, it's like another reset. It's not. It really isn't. It's all very neatly stored. It's properly organized. And and they're going through the process of putting everything into an inventory, etc. But they're racks and racks full of Spectrum Plus 2s, Atari 520 SDFMs, Amiga 500s, etc. Way more than they could ever conceivably, we'll leave that in, I'll put my teeth back in, ever use. And Reese was surprised when the video started picking up comments like, this stuff shouldn't be sat gathering dust in a warehouse. And, oh, that's crazy, it's like a British computer reset. And it's a shame so much kit is simply stored in a warehouse and not in the hands of other collectors who would give them the love they deserve. Maybe it's better in the warehouse if that's going to happen to it. If you have a warehouse that takes so much stuff out of circulation, does that then help drive the cost of retro kit up? And how many of each system does a museum need? This just seems like hoarding. Most of these systems would be better off in the homes of enthusiasts. And it's something that Dean, who's the volunteer who's helping to catalogue all this and organise this stuff, partially addresses to Reese as they're going through the walk around. Dean says, but the idea is that we will try to get all this stuff working and then we'll use it for something. It's just time. So he's talking about a lack of time to get it all done. And Reese himself does reply to comments to try and clarify it. He says, the bulk of the stuff in the storage units and game library, I would do Reese's voice, but he doesn't really have an accent. And the game library has been donated by well-meaning members of the public who didn't know what else to do with it. The old, if you don't take this, it's going down the dump routine, which I'm sure we've all come across at some point or other. This ranges from individual items to entire collections and has been going on since 2008. Hence, they've managed to amass so much. Sadly, as a charity staffed by volunteers, the museum just hasn't got the resources until recently to get it all catalogued, tested, cleaned up and dealt with. But as alluded to a few times in the video, this is now starting to happen with an effort led by Dean, who is a recent recruit. So that's what Reese has said about it. And he's got a good point about 2008. In 2008, a Spectrum Plus 2, a 520 SDFM, and an Amiga 500 wasn't worth anything. I mean, it was... You might get a $5 for it at a car boot sale, but they really weren't worth anything. So that's why they were handed in as junk, and you can understand why the museum would take them rather than say, no, take it to the dump. So it looks as if I don't think they intended to be in a warehouse, to have a warehouse and to be paying for storage with all this stuff, but it's the position they're in now. Neil, this must be a problem that you're faced with. How do you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, the immediate thing I started thinking about when you were reading this, telling this story, because we don't have notes at all. You weren't reading anything. I'll start that again.
Yeah, just throw me under the bus.
Yeah, the immediate thing I was thinking about when you were telling us this story was that exact line of, do you want this or it's going down the tip? 9 out of 10 times when I get contacted and asked if I want a donation, that's the line that comes to me. You know, we've got this stuff. It's only going to go down the tip if you don't take it. So it puts you really in the position of deciding the fate of that bit of kit, whether you really want it or not. The last thing you want to see is it go down the tip. So that's why a lot of stuff does come my way. And of course, it would have come their way in the same manner. This is not a problem that's exclusive to RCM. I've seen it at every computer museum that's ever let me see behind the scenes. You know, you've got very kind people making donations of kit that you accept in good faith, and you give them a promise that you'll give it a good home. And you have to balance that, as you've spoken about, with the volunteers and the resources that you have available to inventory it, to service them, to safely store the kit, to cover the cost of insuring it in case anything bad, happens, and all of that stuff. And then you need to be able to locate it, and you need to be able to put it into service if it needs to be used by the public. And this has all been done on a very small or zero budget at all. Everyone is doing this in good faith to the best of their ability. Of course, if we, by that I mean myself and other museums as well, if they had the budget of the British Museum, for example, we'd have robotic shelves zooming around and up and down from the ceiling. We'd have humidity controlled rooms. We'd have full-time technicians servicing everything. But that's just not going to happen. So each museum has to find its own balance, I think. How many spares you need is determined by how many people you have to service them, how much space you have, how hands-on your museum is, and how much wear and tear this kit is going to get. So you have to balance that all up as to how many you think you might need. So there's no real answer to this question other than so long as the items are accepted in good faith and stored to the best of our abilities, then that's fine by me. And it's also a good idea. Something that we do is we use a donations form, which makes it clear that it's your intention to make good use of the machine, whether it be to put it on display or put it in the hands-on area. But circumstances may change, and if it's better used elsewhere, you might move it on to another museum by way of a free gift or an exchange, a swap for something else, or you might even sell it to raise funds to use those funds for something else, building maintenance or whatever else you need for the museum. So I think it's important that you make sure you make that clear at the point that something's donated. Of course, not to accept it with a view to immediately selling it and going, oh, that's worth a lot of money, I'll have it, and then sticking it straight on eBay. That's not on at all. But if you can think you can make good use of it, then great. And if circumstances change, then so be it. And if you want to take that a step further, museums really need to work together to request, swap, and share machines that are otherwise hidden away in storage so that the public can get to see them, because that's the point of all this, is sharing them with other people. And I agree, if they're going to be stuck in a warehouse for 10 years, never to be seen, then you need to start thinking about, what's the point of you having this? You know, why have you got this? And a way around that could be even to say, well, we're going to open up our archives. If there are any academics that want to have access to this, it's all inventoried and they know where they can find it. And, you know, if one person comes along in 5 years because they want to see that specific model with that specific serial number and something quirky about it, then great. That's the job of a museum. You're doing a good job. There's so much to balance, isn't there? And as I say, there's no real answer to it. Something we're trying to do is we're trying to have our first retro tech car boot sale on the 3rd of July at the Cave. So we're offering tables to be set up outside the Cave so that we can move on some stuff that we're never going to use, but also other people. We've invited Swindon Museum. Well, we should totally invite Leicester too, to just bring a table and to try and get some of that kit that they know they don't need, that they know they'll never use, back out there into the community for people that do want it. But it does still beg the question, if it doesn't sell, is it just going to go down the tip? Where do you draw the line? You know, when does something become worthless? I don't know. But that's a little thing that we're going to try and do. Whether or not it happens is really down to whether we sell enough tables and there's enough interest shown. It might be a terrible idea, but it's just one of those things that we're trying as a new museum. We're just throwing things at the wall, really, and seeing what sticks. And that's one of them. So we'll see if it happens. Yeah. Dave?
Chris?
I think it's a terrible idea, Neil, and you should delay it for at least 2 weeks.
Oh, until you come and visit.
How are you going to get all that back in your suitcase? On the subject of hoarding, hoarding, this is a definition. Hoarding disorder is a persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions because of a perceived need to save them. A person with hoarding disorder experiences distress at the thought of getting rid of the items. Excessive accumulation of items, regardless of actual value, occurs. And I've noticed some uncomfortable things in that definition about myself. I want to defend myself in 2 ways. First of all, there's the thing we keep bringing up, which is FOMO, fear of missing out. If I don't buy that Atari ST monitor switch on eBay now, will I ever see one again? That happens all the time with retro stuff. You think, am I going to see it? Am I going to get another chance? Will I regret this? That's why you buy a lot of stuff. And secondly, there's time. I've got a couple of huge crates of box games that are not on my shelves. They're not going to go on the shelves that I need to sell. But I need to set up an area to really take clear pictures and to make proper, accurate listings, etc. Chris, do you have a hoarding problem?
I definitely don't, no. And I tend to pass stuff on as well if I have got a double up. So somebody donated a heap of games, actually sent them all the way to me from the UK. Most of them I wanted to keep. Some were double ups, but they had bits that my current versions didn't have. So I would, like, for example, the Lotus 3 poster. So obviously I've kept that and then passed on the remains of a double up to somebody else, again, for free. And I think that's fair enough. But I did have the same thoughts when I watched Reese's video. I actually had the same thoughts pass through my head, but I'm trying to practice my new habit on social media, which is to sit on my hands. You know, not everybody needs to see my opinion out in the world, and sometimes it's best kept to myself. But it was a fleeting thought of flipping heck. They've got how many Amigas? But at the end of the day, you know, yes, you have spares. So from my own personal collection, I think I've only got one, what I would call spare. You might just be able to see it on the shelf behind me, maybe not, an Amiga 500 poking out. But actually, that's not even a spare A500. That's literally a case with a semi-functional keyboard. So it's just bits. It's not even a spare machine. And that would be the only thing that I would count as my only double up. But seeing those rows and rows of STs and Amigas in the footage on Reese's video, again, it raises the question, well, are they even all double ups? They might be variations, in terms of what's inside the machine, what version motherboard. Is it a rare motherboard? So, I mean, museums do have a role to play in, I guess, preserving different versions within one model and making sure we've got copies of all of those as well, especially where the chipsets change slightly. So, our perception may be, well, that's a heap of machines that'd be better in. What we really mean when we see something like that is give them to me. That's, if we're honest, if people that are making those comments are honest, that's what they mean is, what's it doing there on the shelf? Give it to me because I don't have one of those. I think that's what we're talking about here. Yeah, what do you reckon?
I've got a spare 3 or 4 STs. I've got the same number of CPCs and Spectrums, maybe a couple of dozen PC motherboards, loads of sticks of RAM, loads of old graphics cards, etc. I've got loads and loads of stuff, and I need to sell it. And it's not even just about the money. I mean, partly it's about the money because I've kind of banked on selling these things. I bought like a job lot to get 1 or 2 items from it, thinking, well, I'll sell what I don't need back on eBay again. But it's the time. I just don't have enough time, and I'll do whatever takes my fancy at that point. So I'll be fixing up that XP machine rather than cleaning things up and getting them on eBay. So if I had all the time in the world, I would have that all dealt with. And I think that's where RCM are. I think if they had all the time in the world, they would deal with it. But there's a whole lot of other things they do. So is that the best use of their time? Are they there just to deal with these old machines and get them back out to people? No, it's not. It's not all they do.
They mentioned in their video that they need to hit about £40,000 a year of income to keep the place going. And when you're doing that with volunteers and on a skeleton crew, I guess, all of those resources have to go to entertaining the public, getting them through the door, marketing the place, making sure the systems that are out are running, and make just simple things like hoovering and cleaning and making it a viable visitor attraction. And then it's a nicety above and beyond that to be able to spend time on the inventory and the servicing and the maintenance over in the warehouse. It's such a tough balance to be able to give people access to these machines and let them have a good day out while trying to tick all the boxes behind the scenes of those other things. It's hard work. It's hard work. And they do a good job of it on balance.
That's so true. And I do think we need to also just mention the fact that there was more than just the scenes of hoarding, or what some people perceive as hoarding, on these videos by Reese. They were both 2 really good videos. So he did one on his main channel, one on his extras channel, and a really nice look at the museum. So not just the behind the scenes where all the stuff is stored, but also the hands-on exhibit part. And it looks like a really cool place to visit. And then he, on his extras channel, he did an interview as well. So really cool information about what those guys are doing there.
And just to stress something as well, we keep mentioning the word hoarding, and it might give you impressions of what you saw at Computer Reset: miscellaneous piles, heaped stuff, toppling over. It's not that at all. It's all fairly organised and proper racking and so on. So that's not the impression we want to create about what they've got there. But I'm sympathetic. I think RCM is where perhaps I am with my stuff. I will get to it. They just don't have time. They accept donations made in good faith, and they just don't have the time to deal with it. So I'm very sympathetic, and I need to. I've got micros that I need to move on, but I think RCM do need to move their stuff on. So if you're in the Leicester area and you have a little time that you can give them, then perhaps you could help out and help them deal with the massive pile they've got and get it all sorted out.
It's time now for your answers to last week's community question of the week. And I think this might be the most popular community question of the week we've ever put out there. So we will likely read out a few more responses than normal. Just to remind you, the question was, it read as follows: I'm sure we've all loaded a game with no intention of playing it at all. We just wanted to hear our favorite theme tune one more time. So quite simply, what is your favorite video game tune? And as an aside, also, what is your favorite video game tune cover? doesn't have to be the same tune. It could be two different tunes. The example we gave last week was banjo guy Ollie, who covered the Lotus Turbo Challenge music so wonderfully.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And Dave, you've got some of yours that you've listed here, haven't you?
No.
No,
That's
who's
Duncan's.
I think there's a Duncan's.
Oh,
yeah.
I see a list of games, so I'll read them out on Duncan's behalf. So some of Duncan's favorite music is Thundercats. I don't know what system that's on. Maybe the
It's on the CPC, and the ST's got the same music. It's really good music for it. It's
is it based on the theme tune itself?
No, not at all. Absolutely
is it the same as
nothing
the
like
Amiga
it.
version?
Probably. It was a pretty lazy port to the Amiga.
I don't know if it was or not.
Because I hated the music on the Amiga version.
Okay, well, I'll read out the rest of Duncan's game. So you had Thundercats, Mega Apocalypse, HATE, Glider Rider. He said this could be the first example of adaptive music. The music changed when you took to the air.
Ultima 6 in the bin.
Batman the movie, Dizzy Down the Rapids is a very jolly tune. And all of these were from the CPC, not on the C64. So it was the C64 and the AY chip. And then on the Amiga, he says Alien Breed, Project X, First Samurai, Turrican 2, No Second Prize. And I recommend you look up No Second Prize because that's an
on the
absolute
ST.
banger, not on the ST. Duncan says to name just a few from the mighty Amiga. We're not talking about frame rates, we're talking about music, Dave. And then he says Mirror's Edge soundtrack from the PlayStation 3 was unique and perfect for the game. So those are Duncan's picks. Let's head over to the question on the subreddit now, and I'll read the first answer out from our friend Paul, aka Hermsky. He says Outrun. I mean, there was always going to be Outrun in the answers, wasn't there? It had to be there.
Definitely.
Outrun. Do I need to say any more? It just takes me back to the good old days when arcades were arcades and not kids' tickets collecting rooms. There you go.
No.
Do we have an Outrun favourite? I'm going to go with Magical Sound Shower.
You're wrong. It's Splash Wave.
Splash
Wave's a better one.
Splash Wave, Dave. High five. Bang.
Okay. I also have a real soft spot for the high score music. I think it's called The Final Wave. I like
it's
that
all
music.
good though. It's all good though. I mean, the whole thing adds to the experience.
Yeah.
There's no bad ones.
Chris, what's the next one?
By Mega STE, who says Atari ST Thrust by Rob Hubbard.
Oh,
and he also says the C64 version is pretty neat as well. So do look at his answer on the subreddit because he's posted links to all of them. So it's cool.
And a remix.
Yep.
There's also a reply from JP Still I noticed in that says, I can't believe they did a whole segment without mentioning Rob Hubbard. I still listen to the Whizball theme as a standalone piece of music now. I mean, we did talk about really good music on the 8-bit and 16 bits, and that's Rob Hubbard. So we kind of mentioned it, but not by name.
You can't beat a bit of the Whizball high score music. Love that. It's like
he did so many good pieces
ever in a game. It's brilliant.
I can't hear it now. I'll look it up after. Yeah.
That one.
For some reason, that's not helping.
Rob Hubbard did it better. Next answer is from Dave Dev Retro. He says, back in the day, I made a mixtape of Amiga music, which I loved. From memory, it included Gods, Magic Pockets, Megalomania, Xenon 2, First Samurai, Super Stardust, Super Frog, Chaos Engine. I think I'd give my single vote award to Super Stardust, all versions, an absolutely banging soundtrack. He says, my all-time favourite composer was the late, great Richard Joseph, a true legend gone too soon. Alistair Brimble comes in a close second.
Nice. And as this is so popular, we'll do 3 more answers as well. So the next one is from our good friend Mean Machine Dean. Hello, Dean. He says, for me, it has to be Bionic Commando. He says the game has a very special place in my gaming history, and the music is one of the very reasons I adore the game on the NES. So that's the version he's gone for.
Nice. Next one's by Flippin' Eck Tucker. Fantastic name. For me, video game music doesn't get any better than Magical Sound Shower.
Oh, we're back on Outrun.
This might be influenced by 2 things. The music being blasted into my 15-year-old ears by the speakers in the back of the seat. And also because Outrun was the first arcade game I ever completed. Nice. I even got a pat on the shoulder from the guy who ran the arcade I was in. Fantastic. Marble Madness is a close second for its sheer uniqueness. There we go.
And the last one we read out is from Moycott. Left field, but the Peter Gunn theme from the game Spy Hunter.
Oh, yes.
It's a TV theme in 1958 used in Blue Brothers in 1980. and on the game released in 1983. Game was line ball okay, but the theme made me put in 20C after 20C at the arcade. There's a 2001 rework of the theme for an updated game, which is okay.
20 cents, I'm guessing that is. 20
Yeah,
cents.
I'm guessing that's 20 cents. Do you get 20 cents?
The remix
it's
is
quarters, so
fantastic.
25 cents. What's 20 cents? Where'd you get 20 cents? It's Australia.
Good point, because it would be quarters normally, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
God.
that's what 20
Oh,
cents.
yeah. Maybe he's in Australia. I don't know. Yeah.
Is that
But
what arcade game was in Australia when you weren't there?
remix, I think, was for the wasn't it for the PS2? The new version of Spy Hunter in 2001, was that for PS2? But it's a fantastic. I'm trying to think of the name of the band, but it's like a metal rendition. It's fantastic. Love it.
Hummus the Peter Gunn tune, Chris, because I've done my karaoke.
Oh, dum 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 da dum 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 da. That's all you're getting.
Oh, we were going to get a barbershop quartet going on there.
We will not be getting a copyright strike for that.
No.
Excellent. Well, superb answers, and there are a huge number more answers over on the subreddit. So go and check them out. The subreddit is reddit.com/r/this week in retro, where you will also find this week's community question of the week. It's all about hoarding versus collecting. I guess the question really is, where do you cross the line? At what point does collecting become hoarding? As we've discussed, there's no real definitive answer to this question. It's just nice to hear your opinions and your thoughts. Is it when you can't open the door to the room anymore? Is it when things start to smell a bit odd? What is it? At what point does hoarding or does collecting become hoarding? As I say, reddit.com/r/this week in retro, where you can participate in that. Also, do submit your news stories to the subreddit, upvote and downvote accordingly, so that we can pick ones out which are popular to discuss. And come and take part on the RMC Retro Discord server, which is discord.gg/RMC Retro, where we have a dedicated This Week in Retro room, and you can come and chat with all the other listeners in there. We hope to see you in there. Dave, Chris, thank you for hanging out again this week. And thank you for listening, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave, Chris from 005 AGIMA, and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.